Right, we're recording now.
Okay.
So, Deirdre, thank you so much for talking to me today about the project at Visual. It really caught my eye by accident. I was just over there and just saw these amazing lazy beds. So I was really pleased that you agreed to have a chat. I guess paths crossed a couple of years ago in relation to a potato growing project in Carlow Town with the community, and I was trying to help people grow spuds in potatoes, and unfortunately it didn't work out very well because we had such a drought, and I think the harvest was quite disappointing. But it really highlighted, I always try and take the positives out of everything, and for me that highlighted just how difficult food is to grow and that we shouldn't take it for granted. And really that our weather systems are changing so much, we need to be thinking about the future a lot more in regards to our food growing. I suppose since then, I've been following you on Instagram, and I've just been really fascinated by the way you managed to weave food, and in particular potatoes, I guess, with arts and culture. And it didn't really occur to me before when I was on my own food growing journey what a creative process it is. So I just wondered if you wouldn't mind sharing with us a bit about yourself and your recent work and how you made that connection with art and culture and food.
Sure. Well, firstly, can I say, it was very interesting our connecting that time at Visual. At the time, I was showing a film in Visual, which was called The Persistent Return. And it was part of a big program that was going on there, which really interested me about farming and contemporary farming and artists who were dealing with farming in the present day. And this is something that has been a concern of mine for a very long time. And I came to it really through thinking about land and landscape. I was an artist based, I went to college in London in the late 70s and stayed there for 17 years and returned to live in Ireland in the Burren, which is a place I'd always wanted to live in 1991, expecting to live out the romantic idyll with, I had the goats, I had the hens, I had the vegetable garden, and thought that I would arrive into a community that would welcome me with open arms. However, that move coincided with a big conflict about tourism development and landscape planning, which was around the development of an interpretive centre at Mullaghmore, in the heart of a part of the Burren that hadn't really been developed to that stage. It also happened to be about 5 miles from where I lived. And that conflict really tore the place apart. And the dynamics that played out in the course of that conflict made it impossible for me to look at landscape in the romantic way that had drawn me to live in the Burren, and really forced me to consider the issues behind our connections with place and our relationship with land and landscape in Ireland, which is a post-colonial country. So it's always going to be problematic, I think.
Yeah.
And that set me on a path that, through a long and circuitous route, that went from making huge paintings that were based on shadow lines of boulders in the Burren, that were kind of metaphor for rural-urban displacement, to thinking about changes in farming in the Burren and the regulation of land and landscape in the Burren, and in special areas of conservation in Ireland. And that led me to reopen a post office in rural County Clare, which had been closed in 2003, and I reopened in 2007, as a kind of point of contact for all the different communities who were living in the area, who all had an investment in the land and in the landscape. But because of the legacy of that conflict, there was a reluctance to kind of share those connections and the affection for the place in public, and with the growing absence of things like pubs and local shops and rural post offices, all the kind of places where newcomers and long-standing residents, long-settled residents and people who could trace connections with the place going back centuries, they were gone. So I reopened the post office, and it was such, it's, you know, it's, I could talk for hours on that, but I won't. It's all there in my website. I called it XPO, or Expo, which it became known as. And I suppose the Spud project emerged from that. And one of the things that happened at Expo that I became really aware of was the relationship with place that many of the farmers had who lived in the Burren, the particular ways of growing things that were tailored in a sense, and tailored through not just decades or hundreds of years of practice, but had evolved over centuries to suit the particular climatic, atmospheric, geological, soil characteristics of that place. One memorable evening's conversation was prompted around growing potatoes and potato ridges or lazy beds. A lot of people that I know take offense at the term lazy beds because it implies that they're not hard work.
And they're far from it.
Yeah, we've had a little back and forth on this. Far from it. It's the most extraordinary technology.
Yes.
The skill, you know, when you look at the structure of a lazy bed, the fold without breaking the sides, the fold that makes the sandwich of grass.
Yes.
With the filling of manure that the potato is planted through, which perfectly sustains the potato. The ridges down the sides that will drain away excess moisture. The tools that evolved in the course of the evolution of that technology in different parts of the country. So Loy's, which is the foot plough that's used, the design ranges from large wedge shapes to really long, narrow loys, depending on the soil. So that technology is quite extraordinary. And what I heard that evening at Expo was the particular technology to do with that place. And as we were talking and people were batting backwards and forwards different words, I thought, gosh, you know, firstly, I was really interested because I knew nothing about growing potatoes and I wanted to grow them.
Yes.
And secondly, I thought this is a really efficient way of converting grass into a vegetable plot. And so many people are interested in doing that, but get daunted by the sheer hard labor of what do you do? Do you take off the scrawl on the top? Do you take off the grass and then start digging? And that destroys so many of the ecosystems of the soil. So this is a really efficient and effective way of maintaining soil health while breaking and making the best use of the growing grass as a fertilizer for the potatoes, while simultaneously breaking the ground.
Yeah, and not just breaking it and getting rid of it, and which is what many people do. Or we'll just take the top sod off and get rid of it, and then we'll dig. Everything.
Yeah, exactly. So, and you know, the growing potatoes, the foliage keeps down weeds. So, you know, in September, hopefully, if you don't get the blight, you end up with cleared ground.
Yeah.
So that was the impetus for starting the Spud project. And then, of course, I thought, as I encountered various people's responses to doing a project about potatoes, and there was a kind of embarrassment about it, associated with it. Not embarrassment, sometimes embarrassment in some places. In other places, a bit of a snigger.
Right.
You know, because like, what, are you going to be the potato artist? As though it's somehow less than or less
Yeah.
important or whatever. And I really relish that. I find that very interesting, and I like to poke a stick at it.
Yeah.
So that's really what started me on the trajectory of using the potato. It's not so much that the project is all about the potato, but that the potato is a really useful tool for looking at attitudes for everything from food security, sustainability, technologies, and how we might navigate. Now that's taken me into a new project called Sustainment Experiment, which is about how we navigate climate change. But the potato has been the kind of engine for that inquiry.
It's the story, isn't it? And
Yeah.
stories are just so important. I just love the way that you've managed to capture that, and you saw the opportunity and you've captured that, the storytelling, and also that relationship to land. I know when we moved over and we were looking for a house, we were driving around looking for old houses, and we finally found one. But the farmer wouldn't sell it to us until he'd taken my husband up the pub at least half a dozen times and drank 7 pints with him just to check out that we were okay to live near.
Yeah.
So and that's something that we hadn't come across before, and it was just made for a really nice relationship actually.
Yeah.
Going forward.
Yeah. Which makes sense, you know, because like it's really only in the last, when I moved back to Clare, it was on, you know, the person moving to live in a strange place where they had no prior connections, although my mother was from Clare, but East Clare. That wasn't that common. There was a kind of big movement of alternative, people interested in alternatives, ways of living, but mainly to East Clare, less to North Clare, in the 60s and 70s. But other than that, it was, I remember doing a residency in a local school and one of the girls there saying to me, oh, I've never been to Dublin. And she was 12.
Yeah.
And I was shocked by this because the, you know, travel was such an important part of life then. But that way of being in place and living in place, which of course now we're all forced to do again.
Yeah.
You know, it's such a recent phenomenon that we've cut those ties.
Yes. Yeah.
And one of the things that came with being in place was the social skills to live in place and to have the networks of support that would allow you to sustain living in place. So your neighbor's reaction makes complete sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And so important. I remember being at a talk at Clough-Jordan Eco Village where they were saying we actually have to learn to be a community again, because we had that and then we lost it. And now if we're to get through the next however many 50 years, we have to learn how to be with each other again, to support each other.
Yeah. I just want to come back to something you were saying there about, you know, the communicating the story. I think one of the really interesting skills artists can bring to thinking about food, farming, and food security. I'm no expert, right? I am, and I make no claim to any kind of agricultural expertise. People tell me things and I forget immediately. So there's no point in relying on me for kind of verifiable information. I usually try and put it on the website before I forget about it, if I have that kind of information. But I think that's not my role, in a sense. I don't see that as my role as an artist. I see, what I think is really interesting is the capacity to go in and not be aligned to the agricultural sector and not be aligned to any particular scientific sector, but in a sense to be in there as a kind of ignorant fool. You know, that's a very strong way of putting it, but I'm kind of drawing on a French theorist when I'm saying that, but to go in there wearing my ignorance in a sense, and in that space of unknowing inquiry, things can happen.
Absolutely.
Because the dynamic that has governed so much about farming in Ireland has been one of experts telling people how to do it right. And those qualities that I spoke about in the very beginning, about living in place and adapting to the particular circumstance of a place, the soil type and everything that we know about how the weather hits a particular place, that tacit knowledge or lay knowledge or indigenous knowledge is what is now beginning to be recognized as the crucial skill that we need to navigate climate change.
Yes, and part of that whole regenerative agriculture movement
Exactly.
that is starting to build. Yeah.
Exactly. And so the Spud project took me to this new project now called Sustainment Experiments. And actually, the potato ridges outside visual are a kind of flag to say Sustainment Experiments has started. This is a technology that was extraordinary, that still holds value. And I'll have a lovely video of the Loy Association member, one of the Loy Association members, demonstrating beautifully how to make a potato ridge. But those potato ridges are a kind of technology of the past. And that square, which is outside visual, which is in the shape of an I-Ching, the Chinese book of changes, which is a way of telling the future. It's really more a way of helping you to identify. You ask the I-Ching a question and you throw coins or you hit a button on the app, and the I-Ching will throw you back a piece of text that then becomes a kind of framework for thinking about the answer to that question. Okay.
Interesting. I was wondering about the letter actually, and or the shape and how you
shape. Yeah, that's an I-Ching hexagram number 15.
Right.
And the reason I wanted to use a decorative shape or a shape was because I'd worked with the Loy Association before at the Irish Museum of Modern Art, and in that instance, I had drawn on a design from an Irish Arts and Crafts revival book. And the decorative motif that was in that book illustrated by Margaret Stokes. And they did the most extraordinary, beautiful decorative potato ridges on the front lawn of Imma. And so the capacity for the ridge to communicate beyond its purely functional value really interested me. And I had been talking to Emma Lucy and the team at Visual about doing a planting of a crop called Sainfoin. I'll talk about that in a minute.
Yeah.
And we were chatting away there, and Derek Blanche, who's managing the beehives, he was going, "Oh yeah, I'll clear the ground for you." And he was saying he'd get a machine for clearing the ground. And I thought to myself, and we were chatting, and it was in the course of the conversation, I said, don't do that. Let's just use potato ridges.
Yeah.
And then 2 minutes later, I had been thinking about the I-Ching, and I realized that was the perfect thing to use as a way to open a conversation about the future of food production and farming, which is what Sustainment Experiments is all about.
Yes.
So the hexagram that you see, I'll read you out what the I-Ching says it means, right?
Yeah, lovely.
Modesty creates success. Balance and adjust things by cutting through pride and complication. Reduce what's overdeveloped. Don't try to advance yourself. Beware of conceit and arrogance. Be consistent and resilient. I love this one. Don't follow policy. And finally, do the right thing.
I love that. I think I'd like a print of that, please, for my wall.
It's on the website. You can go to it, and it'll be on the Visual website. Yeah. It's extraordinary,
Something we should all be aiming towards, really, or thinking, keeping in mind the whole time.
And Sustainment Experiments really, it came out of the Spud project, and the film that I showed at Visual, The Persistent Return, was really, it tracked the history of the potato and the way the potato moved from South America to Europe, and it kind of fueled the development of in European expansion and colonialism, because the potato was really what allowed them to feed the armies, but also to feed the labor forces that fueled the Industrial Revolution, that tipped the balance of power, the global balance of power in favor of Northern Europe. So the potato kind of really helped reshape the world. It helped reshape global politics, and it fueled the colonial project. And the colonial project, if you think about it, that was a project that came out of Enlightenment values. Now, there's a design theorist called Tony Fry, and Tony Fry has put forward the notion of sustainment as an equivalent moment to the Enlightenment. Right. Something that will bring about the same complete shift in cultural behaviors, in all forms of behavior, whether cultural or scientific, which he says and he argues is necessary if we are to avert the inevitable, or what seems to be inevitable, catastrophe, global catastrophe that will come with climate change and biodiversity loss.
Yeah.
So I thought that is such a brilliant word, sustainment. And it's about that complete reframing of, instead of the world revolving around the individual, which is what happened with the Enlightenment, yes, that we have to change that to think about how the world can revolve around all the human and non-human inhabitants. It's as simple as that.
Yeah.
So Sustainment Experiments is a series of experiments that are designed to engage in different ways with thinking about that problem. And at Visual, that I-Ching design in potato ridges was literally breaking the ground on the idea. And that will be followed by a planting of a plant called Sainfoin.
Right.
And Sainfoin, the word, means healthy hay in French. And it was a crop that was grown in Europe. It came from the Middle East, I think, originally, and was grown in Europe and the UK extensively, particularly in southern England, up until the 1950s. With the advent of cheap nitrates, fertilizers, and ryegrass, it fell out of use very rapidly. But it's now being reconsidered because of along with a raft of other herbal leys, yes, as a way of growing and producing livestock fodder that sustains soil quality and ecosystems, and has all sorts of other beneficial side effects. So, other examples of these kind of herbal leys would include lucerne, bird's foot trefoil, different red and white clovers. So they're in the UK, and particularly in the University of Reading, they're doing a lot of research into these herbal leys. In 2017, Ciara Healy-Musson, she put my name forward for a residency that was being run by the Wellcome Trust in the Museum of English Rural Life in Reading. And so I had a look at what work was going on in Reading, particularly in the field of agriculture. That's, at the same time as that was going on, I was working on a project called Farm, which is looking at grass-fed beef and clearly identifying beef as grass-fed and reared humanely outdoors.
Yeah.
And I had done some research visits to the States and kind of looked at it going on there. And I was, and this had been initiated by a researcher I know at Teagasc that I've worked with called Anya McInwalsh. And Anya's a senior researcher there. And So I think about 2013, she organized a conference on clearly identifying beef that is grass-fed in order to add economic value and make it more viable for smaller producers. And this really interested me because I think small farmers have to be supported and small farms have to be maintained in Ireland. And we're at a pivotal moment where so many are leaving farming and land is being bought up by large development corporations. And with them goes the biodiversity that they support. So I think this is a pivotal moment. Part of my thinking, sorry, this very long-winded way of getting to why Sainfoin, why this particular project. So I had gone, as part of my research into this whole area, I went to the University of Reading. I got the residency and I was working in the museum's archives, and it's just the best place. It's amazing. And I decided to look at Sainfoin because there was research going on in the University of Reading about this plant. And what interested me was that it seemed to do everything. It seemed to provide, it's a fantastic source of protein for livestock. It has anthelmintic, I think that's the word, properties, which means it makes, the stomach less receptive to wormers, which is a real issue with sheep because they're becoming resistant to all commercial types of wormers.
But also then the dung beetles and everything else.
Exactly, all the ecosystems they support aren't killed off. It fixes nitrates in the soil.
Yeah.
It has a really long taproot, so it grows in near drought conditions, which is crucial.
Yes.
Its flowers are extraordinarily popular with bees. Wow. So and in France, it's cultivated purely for its honey.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so honey producers grow Sainfoin. So it has all these beneficial effects, both for the soil ecosystems and for changing climates. And the other most important attribute, and the thing that made me interested in the first place, was the research in Reading was going on into its capacity to reduce methane as part of a cow's diet.
Yeah.
So I thought, why isn't this known about? What's the reason why it's not been adapted? I still haven't really got a decent answer to that. And through that research, I made a film about it called Speculative Optimism. And then as part of that, I visited a company called Real Farm Ed and Cotswold Seeds. And I'm sure you know of Real Farm Ed. If you don't, you should.
Yeah.
It is an extraordinary farm education project run by the owner of Cotswold Seeds. And it's really a way of trying to sustain farmers, add the conservation premium is the hard-nosed way of framing it, to producing food that, that is always going to be in competition with cheap food production systems that are having the disastrous impact that they're having on soil worldwide.
Yes.
So I'm going Sainfoin to follow up from that. We're going to cover the square over the winter so that weeds don't grow. And Sainfoin is usually planted, the soil has to be at 7 degrees or higher to plant. It won't stand cold weather in the beginning. So you can imagine on a year like this, it would be difficult.
Yeah.
But I've been testing it out here on patches in my garden, and it's doing really well at the moment. And I've given some seed to Derek up at Visual, so he's planting it in areas around the I-Ching hexagram. And next year, there will be a beautiful patch, I hope, of Sainfoin. And the flowers will really serve as a flag. And of course, then their pollen will also serve as the bees that are being maintained in Visual's garden.
And it helps to get people talking and helps with new conversations. And and that's really where art's, you know, the power of it, isn't it, really?
Well, it is about providing the, I suppose, the kind of connective point.
Yeah.
And in 2018, when I remember meeting a group of women farmers from the southeast who came to visit the, do you remember?
Yeah.
Who came to visit the exhibition. And I was really interested in the kind of innovative approaches that they were showing to farming. Lorna Sixsmith and her writing, and, you know, of course, Susanna Crompton.
Well, I'm sure, because I was involved with the GROW project, a European project, a soil
project that I broke my back and I couldn't take part in.
Yeah. I know. It unfortunately, having volunteered to help coordinate it in the southeast, we then learned that it was quite restrictive. We were trying to measure soil moisture levels, and for a European project, so to qualify what the satellites were finding with actual data, but you needed to not have buildings around or anything. So, so it was quite difficult to then find people. We had to find farmers who were the only people with space that could. But one lovely thing that came from that, and again at the Visual, I think the Visual is a really good place to host these kind of conversations, is we had a day, I suppose, where we brought everybody together who either had some senses or was interested in the project. And we had everybody from Turkish advisors to small farmers to larger farmers to just individuals with plots of land, and they were all in the room together, and we were talking about soil, and that was magical for me, just to have conversations about soil. And the much line is that we should never be calling it dirt or clay. It's soil, it's teeming with life. I'm chatting with you today. I was reading, Susanna actually had an article published in the farming section of The Independent this last week.
Oh, did she?
As part of her regenerative farming hat. And a meme was created and is now being shared across social media everywhere, where she's saying that for small farmers to survive, they have to reduce the inputs. It's the only way, and returning to those cover mixes and the clover mixes, and is really going to be an essential part of that.
That's exactly, we're all singing from the same hymn sheet.
Yeah, and to have that kind of coverage is quite a big move, really.
Yeah.
Because up until quite recently, regenerative, it's a bit like organic, I suppose. It's kind of, you know, or maybe organic at the beginning. It's only just starting to kind of bubble and gain momentum, but I think it can happen quickly once people realize that.
I think that's where things like the hexagram outside Visual are really useful, because it's a kind of it's a symbol that is legible, I think, or becomes a gateway to understand some of the complexity that's involved. And this project is going to go on over the next 4 years, and that patch of Sainfoin is going to stay there.
Brilliant.
It's going to stay there. So, I mean, that's the great thing about, you know, working with Visual, and, you know, the work that Holly Cairns has been doing at the Butler Gallery. This is going to create a critical mass. And it's no surprise that artists are seeing a place for how we can provide that kind of communicative skill, I guess. You know, if you think of agriculture, it's made up of agri plus culture. You know?
Lost that culture down the way, haven't we, with industrialization, but it's there still.
Exactly. And that, you know, there are many complex questions that have to be teased out.
Yeah.
It's not just about all industrial production is bad. You know, but it's got to be about thinking about how can industrial production be made so that food remains affordable for everybody, but it doesn't cause the kind of devastating impact that it is doing on soil health in particular. I think, you know, the soil sequestration and the role that soil plays in sequestering the carbon is really only now beginning to be talked about properly.
And that's where the scientists, you know, where people are quick to bash the scientists and bash the farmers, but they're the ones actually who are finding out all of this so that we can kind of find solutions.
But I suppose it's about, and I think, again, what I'm trying to do with Sustainment Experiments is create space where it is kind of safe in a way, or what that allows the kind of two-way exchanges between farmers who know how their land works and who know the systems of farming that actually they've been told to stop doing for so long.
Yes.
But older farmers in particular still have that knowledge, and scientists need to learn to listen.
Yeah.
And hear that experience and bring that experience to bear on the research that they're doing. And that kind of transdisciplinary space going backwards and forwards between the tacit knowledge or the indigenous knowledge or the lay knowledge of the farmer and the scientific knowledge of the researchers is really, that's what we can do as artists, I think.
And I don't think there's an ignorant fool in you, Deirdre. But I love your suggestion.
Okay, that was probably a bit of a silly term to use, but
I actually understood exactly what you were trying to say.
I think what I'm trying to say is it's about embracing not knowing.
Yeah.
And by publicly not knowing.
Yeah.
By not trying to assume the authority that comes with a particular expertise. And I'm aware of saying that actually I do carry cultural authority, but in the everyday world, that holds far less weight than, say, the weight of an agricultural advisor.
Well, I mean, we're all still learning as well. Yeah. You know, I'm trained in it, I educate in it, but and actually I probably in a way similar, I try and educate in a way, I still remember what it was like to know nothing. Yeah. So when I educate, I come from that point. Whereas I know there's other people who will fill a class with science and all the rest of it, but that doesn't help the people who are still at this side. Yeah. So that's the side I tend to try and hang out in, just to try and help bring people. And no, I understand that, actually.
I think it's also really important to remember that, well, you know, I know that you know this, but you know, the more you know, the less you know.
Oh,
you realize the field is out there and that you will never arrive at a point. Yeah. And I think one of the things that is crucial, and again, this is something I'm only beginning to think through now, or through my work, it's always been there. But there are non-human ways of knowing.
Yes.
You know,
yeah.
That have never been acknowledged.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, for example, the kind of popularization recently, and I you know, through novels of the ways that trees can communicate, for example.
Yeah. The future, what's the future? What's next? You mentioned about wanting to bring farmers together. Have you got something?
Yeah, that's I suppose for the next 2 years, my plan is to bring farmers together to I suppose be a kind of a conduit for some of this thinking, farmers and scientists together. So if there are any scientists listening to this right now who are interested in herbal lays and you know, all of the issues that we've been talking about, it would be really good to get in touch with me, please. Visual is being really supportive of this work. So you know, that's going to be a kind of home for the conversations that will be taking place in the region.
Lovely.
And Claire Breen is the engagement curator there, and I'm working with her on how we might best do that.
Yeah.
At the same time, next year I'll be the Soil Commission resident artist in the Butler. Right now, I'm just about to go to Dublin tomorrow for a little while to work at the fire station in Dublin. I got an award to go and make a dinner service there. And the dinner service is going to be used for a series of feast events, which will be bringing together farmers and scientists and activists and people who are interested in food production and consumption, and how we might change the habits that kind of go with production and consumption.
That sounds exciting.
There'll be 3 events. The first one's going to be or 4 events actually. The first one's going to be at the Butler next year. One will be at the Butler next year, probably as part of the Taste Kilkenny Festival. One will be in Paris, looking at growing food for cities, and in particular in Paris, they're doing a lot of research into growing industrial food production on rooftops at scale, but very concentrated and in a sustainable manner for cities. And then there'll be a third event, which will either be at the Irish Museum of Modern Art, it depends on whether they're going to be doing building work there or not, or in another location in Dublin. And that'll be about policymakers and bringing policymakers together with the farmers and the activists who are making change, so that one becomes visible to the other.
Yes, yes.
And the dinner service that I'm making, and this is where the research with farmers and scientists is really important. I'm trying to create a space where people can imagine what the future of food might be. So the idea for the dinners was based on a meal held by a very important French Enlightenment figure called Parmentier, who gave his name to lots of potato recipes because he was a bit of a potato evangelist in 17th century France. It was he who changed cultural attitudes to the potato in France and popularized it, and thus averted cyclical famines that were a feature of 17th century French life, 18th century French life. So one of the things that Parmentier did was he had a meal of potatoes, and a famous feast where he invited all the luminaries of the time. Benjamin Franklin was there, along with lots of others. And every dish was made from potatoes. And it was believed that that meal inspired the production of a range of china, which featured potato flowers. So last summer I went to I got the Kilkenny residency at the Irish Cultural Centre in Paris, which is amazing. And it allowed me to go and research. I was really interested in this chinaware as a kind of model for something I might do.
Yes, yes.
And then I discovered when I was in France that actually the potato flower motif was an invention.
Oh.
Yeah. It came from a kind of peculiar, it emerged out of a kind of popular pottery that was made in Spain, but that it wasn't a potato motif at all that was used in that. But then that got me thinking about the whole notion of a potato motif.
Yes, that's because I mean the potato. I was showing a class actually last week. Potato, tomato, aubergine. Yeah, they're just they're beautiful, but they're also lovely.
Yeah.
I love
But the motif in this case for the Sustainment project, what I want to do is try and identify through conversation with farmers and scientists what their ideal plant might be, what the characteristics of the ideal plant might be,
yeah,
and design a motif. a new motif for the
Right.
sustainment era.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. So again, it's all about providing dialogical or discursive space.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the final product from the project, as it were, will be a film.
Okay. Oh, we should look forward to that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think, Deirdre, we will, that actually sounds like the perfect ending for our conversation. I'd really like to thank you for your time and describing all of that with me. And we look forward to seeing your work, and I definitely look forward to hearing more about it and watching those connections start to be made.